Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. Today we are going live, which is we haven't done for a while. I'm joined today by SocialFlow co-founder Frank Spicer. The reason we're here today is because I've tortured you a little bit over the last couple of weeks, asking you to do some searches on FBI Director James Comey, and we wanted to see sort of how he's been performing on social media. And what we were quite surprised about, at least about a week and a half ago, was we were surprised that in Trump's first 100 days that he came up only once in the top 500 most consumed articles. He came up only one time.
That's right.
Which surprises a lot. And we talked about the things that did surface the top, but that's not why we're here. What we're talking about today. It made us then check in again on him when he was fired early this week. And then we did, well, then you tell me, like, once you did relaunched the search, what did we find 2 or 3 days ago?
Well, we see that there's a lot of activity, a lot of posts about, James Comey, but not necessarily the consumption around those stories that we would have expected. I expected it personally to be one of the biggest stories of, the past year.
Right. And it just to be clear, for him, relative to Comey stories, it did spike.
Yes.
It did spike quite nicely.
Yeah, you take the way Comey's performed over the past year in terms of, reach and distribution of stories about James Comey, and the past few days have been, orders of magnitude above what he was normally, garnering in terms of reach and clicks and stuff like that. But the interesting thing is even though there's not a lot of stories that are big hits about Comey, in the past 4 days, by my count as of this morning, the media partners that use SocialFlow have published over 6,000 stories to Facebook mentioning James Comey in just that period of time. So it's a clear sign that the news media definitely realizes it's a big story.
Right. But now let's compare Comey, since Comey's in his own sort of bubble, if you like, compared to these. We're looking at the data that you pulled. This is Comey's firing compared to other big events.
Right.
There's Flynn's firing, there's inauguration, the travel ban, there's the GOP cancels or tries to cancel the American Health Care Act. There's the House voting on it, and then we have here Comey fire, which is obviously we're looking at it's pretty small. They have the Syria strike. We have Maddow's reporting on taxes that got some attention, and also budget cuts.
Right.
So comparing Comey to these rather big stories in the last since February 13th, it looks like since inauguration, he's still pretty small when you look at this. When you look at engagement per post and reach per post, that must surprise you.
Yes, that did surprise me, but that amount of data doesn't lie. I mean, we have so much data,
right,
and so much breadth of what we're doing. We could definitely see what the audience considers to be a major story and what's not. I would take in terms of analysis, I would take the inauguration data out because that occurs on a cycle. It's an interval. It happens every 4 or 8 years,
right,
and everybody in the world, no matter your political persuasion, understands that that's happening.
Right.
So if you take that out, the difference with everything else in there is it's all germane specifically to this administration and things that they've done since they've just prior to going in versus till now.
Right.
And
just point out, Comey and budget cuts look like they're pretty much even.
Right. In terms of reach per post.
Right.
So yes, they're not spreading far and wide. I think it's a sign that people may not completely understand the issue around this.
And that perhaps Comey, didn't we also think that, or surmise that people may not necessarily associate Comey with the Russia investigation. They could be almost like separate entities in people's minds.
Yes, I mean, according to what we looked at, it'd probably be fair to assume not a lot of people at the start, like once he was fired. As of that time, there's probably a lot of people that didn't realize that he was looking into Russian ties with anybody in the administration.
No, we shared this data with a few outlets, including Axios, the fairly new online, I think it's political and cultural digital site started by Mike Allen from Politico fame.
Right.
Axios, as soon as Axios published this, published our data, this thing seemed to take off. It was suddenly front and center on Drudge. Are you surprised that? Were you surprised that it sort of gotten the quick attention? Like now Comey may become, quite a big story based on some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm primarily just a data guy, right? So
I'm only asking you to interpret the data.
Yeah, so I try to be neutral and
of course,
removed from the way I interpret everything. And what I'm interested in tracking is seeing. We know that a lot of stories have been recently written about this topic. And I'm interested in tracking to see, did the investigative journalism piece, that all the work that went into this, does it result in a big story down the road? Because if it's a complex issue and people work to uncover it, what we might see is a disruption in the way the news cycles worked over the past few years or 5 years or whatever.
Right.
So, with social being one of those things that sort of is a very ephemeral feel to like things washing in, washing out of what's a big story. This would be one of the major examples of investment in investigative journalism yielding a big outcome in terms of distribution and reach. But they needed to sort of feed the fire a little bit and get everybody up to speed and then develop it over a few days, which looks more like an old news cycle way of doing things. This might actually signal a change in the way news works. We'll track that.
And that I think that's extremely interesting and a good point to add. What I find it was sort of irony in all this is, our data shows that for the first 100 days, Comey was barely a blip on social media.
That's
His
right.
firing really gave him elevated status, if you like, in terms of just being covered and mentioned. And now the last 24 hours, I think now that there's been this sort of back and forth with Trump and sources talking about this dinner, it's probably it'd be interesting to see what this does over the next 3 or 4 days, and we should talk about it because it seems to have a life of its own.
Yeah, it's a pretty famous dinner already, so we'll have to see what happens.
All right, thanks very much, Frank,
Sure.
and thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll be back hopefully next week with more data on this.